What's up, guys? Ming the Merciless here. We're back with part 2, PokerVIP, Global Poker. And we're chilling on the same 6-max tables we were playing on before. We were talking about hand reading, combinatorics, going over some equities. And we're just going to see how this develops. What's going on today? We're going to fold the 2-5 offsuit combination. I'm going to go ahead and check the Queen-8 offsuit. And 4-9-7 rainbow, not a board texture we interact with. He leads, but there's not much else we can really do here. No reason to float. No backdoor flush draws. It is a reasonable price to be floating if we have something that we can, connect with the board, whatever. We have backdoor flush draw, we might call there. But in this spot, not really much reason to do anything other than fold. You can just go ahead and limp it in with the Jack-9 offsuit. We can definitely isolate some out of position, but you want to do that a little bit less often, especially if you're not going to get that many folds because you're just creating a bigger pot against a guy. I mean, even if he's got a loose range, he still has position on you. So we want to be slightly careful. We got Life's Good over here in the big blind. He checks as well. And we don't interact with this board texture whatsoever, so we're just going to check. Everybody and their brother check like lickety-split there. So we're going to go ahead and try to bet with our gut shot on this turn. Given the speed of our opponent's checks. And when we get small, he raises very small here. I mean, generally he's going to have a made hand. This is never a bluff. So we're essentially looking at implied odds of hitting at 10. Getting 4-1, and the 10 of diamonds is probably still good. Oh, we're just going to go ahead and call. This is a very small raise, and if we hit our 10, we'll just go ahead and check. Hopefully he does bet this river. I could definitely lead this river if it wasn't the diamond, maybe. But he should generally have 2-pair plus here when he makes this raise. If he has a flush draw, then that kind of sucks. But he doesn't have a flush draw that often, and we do have the 9 of diamonds. So I would assume that whatever he's raising on the turn, he's going to raise on the river. And it looks like he was raising on the turn with a pair of 9s. What a whack job. I'm not really sure what that's all about. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Works out for us, thankfully, this time. It's good. It's good. We will isolate here with King-Queen offsuit for sure. And we're going to have to fold Ace-8. Rainbow board texture, no backdoor draws, no way to really improve. Even if we hit an 8, we could be dominated. An Ace, same thing. And we get back to this dude. He flat calls. And we flop a hand that wants to just check back. You have a gut shot, you have second pair. This hand is relatively invulnerable if it is the best hand now. It's not easily outdrawn against something like pocket 8s, something like Jack 10. And he's not very likely to have connected with this board all that often on this texture. Now, maybe he checks an ace here some as well, but I do think that this is a pretty good spot to just check back, try to induce a bluff from your opponent on the river, or try to get a value bet in from him. And when he bets this river, we could definitely consider raising here. I think we are going to raise here just because he's going to have a lot of ace-x. He can have worse kings. He doesn't have that many boats. But it is a little bit dicey when he pots it. But I do think that's a good spot to raise. So it ends up working out for us. It ends up working out. I like checking the turn anyway, just because whenever your opponent limps and calls a bet and the board texture is so Broadway heavy, they're very likely to have tons of combinations of middling types of cards, or like small pocket pairs. They have their suited connectors in the 6-7 range, and that's why checking a second time makes a lot of sense, because if they have an ace, they're probably going to either bet call the river or check call the river anyway, and if you bet the turn and bet the river, you might not get a ton of action, which is why when they check twice there, you can certainly make a case for bluffing twice and trying to get people to fold the occasional ace. Now, don't get me wrong. In the global poker games, you might not get that many folds whatsoever, so you definitely want to be careful and temper your bluffs in those spots. I don't mean that you're always going to get folds. You just kind of have to take it with case by case. If my opponent seems to be folding to these lines, then I'll use this as a line. And maybe your opponent is just doing lines. I don't know, and then he's never folding. We'll go ahead and raise it up with 10-8 of clubs. And 6-10 offsuit is going to be a checking combination. But yeah, a lot of people are just going to bet automatically with their king on the next, on that check back on the flop, hit the king on the turn. They're just going to bet because they want to get a bunch of value. But the thing is, like, in spots where your opponent's range is such that you can get value because they have a lot of calling combos, that's fine. You should definitely be betting. This is a spot where your opponent has a relatively wide range, and it would make a little bit more sense for us to just check back and let him get there with a little bit of pair action, or let him bluff the river. all that kind of stuff. And I think we'll just go ahead and check here. Let this dude bet again. This guy might have a couple of boats here. Probably doesn't have too many. They're just going to go ahead and value bet against trips and something like a pair of eights. It's not a great spot. We can still be beat over here by 7-9 and King 10, so we just kind of want to check call down. It's also important to be able to protect your King X combinations, so I don't mind just having 10-6 in our range as like a garbage 2 pair and let him value bet his King Jack and his King Queen. And he ends up having 4-5 and we induce bluffs every which way, so that's great for us as well. Plenty of combinations your opponent can be bluffing with. We're going to fold the 5-10 offsuit. Mostly be folding the King 3 offsuit. But yeah, it's really important to not over-bluff in games where you're not getting folds somewhere. That's a problem. So when your opponent has a bunch of folding combinations on the flop, and he does fold, then you can clearly bet quite a bit. And you can over c-bet anyway in spots where you're getting folds on turn or rivers, and that works out just fine. If you're playing on global poker and the games are loose that you're playing in and you're not getting as many flop folds, that means that you're either going to have to tighten up your flop betting range or you're going to have to get more folds on the turn or the river by attacking those weaker ranges. Now, this is of course going to increase your variance, but that's kind of the nature of the game. Because if you're betting in a spot where you're not getting enough folds and then you don't get those folds later that you should have gotten, that's way worse for you than just having a tighter range in the first place. And we're just going to go ahead and limp behind Pooch here. This is a playable hand for sure, but we don't want to really isolate, get called every time. We know that Pooch doesn't fold a lot. That's kind of the thing, is that when your game is loose and your players don't fold a lot, then you just have to play slightly smaller pots and exploit the fact that they're not folding enough of the time with tighter ranges and thinner value bets. And we're just going to check back here. There's something to be said for betting this flop, but it is a spot where we're probably going to get called at a high frequency, and we aren't really going to improve that much. So if this was heads up and they check to us and we had the lead, I'd probably just go ahead and bet to kind of protect our hand's equity. We don't have a backdoor flush draw or anything like that. For the most part, I like betting it, but in a four-way pot, I think we're just kind of the worst hand more often, and we're going to get less folds, and we're not really going to improve that much. We'll just get the hell out of here. Too many other cards out there, man. It's like being up against like PLO hands and whatnot. It's too crazy. But yeah, so the general point is that when your opponent has too high of a calling frequency on one street, the flop will say, then you need to either take advantage of that by making them fold on a future street, or take advantage of that by having a tighter betting range on the flop. Anyway, it's not bad to do both of those things together either, because when you have a tighter betting range on the flop, you're going to have more combinations of hands that have higher equity on turns or rivers. So by the nature of a tight flop range, you will also have more, you'll just have more hands that'll be able to bet on turns or rivers. So that'll happen anyway. But if you're over bluffing on the flop against a guy who's just under folding, then you're going to be in some really messy scenarios on the turn or the river. And you're going to get yourself into some spots where you're double barreling, and then you're not sure what to do on the river, and you think you should fold, but then you shouldn't. Then he calls you, twice and, checks down. He's just got like second or third pair. And, you don't want to make it such that you're really going to tear your hair out playing in these spots against these dudes. You just want to kind of keep it relatively uniform, straightforward. If they're not folding enough on the flop, just tighten up and don't bet as much on the flop. Take more double barrel lines versus check. Because if your opponent checks the flop, you check back, they check the turn. A lot of the times their range is capped. Maybe they have top pair, weak kicker. Mostly they have second pair or worse. Occasionally they'll have a flush draw, as you saw here, where we did shove as a bluff and it didn't work out. But I don't mind that. Again, it's relatively tough for your opponent to have a flush in that spot, and a lot of my opponents will rarely have a flush in that spot that doesn't also contain a jack or a six. So while you're going to run into some flushes for sure, you're probably getting any other sort of pair or whatever else they're playing that way to end up folding. Now, do you have to do something like that? No, you certainly don't. You're going to get mixed results with that type of stuff. And I would probably say it's fair to say that you might want to not do much of that at all in these games, just because it's going to be a little bit more difficult to predict your opponent's tendencies, a little bit more difficult to predict the amount of fold equity we have when they are taking that line. And if they end up being more passive and just kind of calling station style dudes, then they're probably not going to fold as much when they are leading, because even though the bet is just like half pot, that can't really be a flush, right? it might very well be. So we very well could have just spewed off in that situation and never should have done that. Just should have folded the river. But that's okay. That's okay. So we've got a pair and an open-ended straight draw, backdoor flush draw. We're going to go ahead and check. We're going to call a bet on the flop, go from there. How many combinations of sets are there on the board, guys? 7, because we have a 5. Pooch is betting. We're going to call. We have decent equity against whatever he's got. We do hit the best card in the deck for us as we make our straight. And the flush draw is out there as well. So we're now free rolling any of his straight draws that it doesn't end up being 8, 9. We're going to isolate with Jack 9. And I don't know. He bets the flop here. He doesn't really fold all that much. So I think we're just going to go for a value bet. He should never have 8, 9. He should just generally be capped there to maybe 2 pair. And this is exactly the type of board texture I'm talking about. Normally this would be an easy c-bet, especially if you have a club in your hand. But in this spot, this dude, I think I'll just go ahead and check back and then see what happens on the turn. So when he checks twice, now I'm going to go ahead and bet. I think that's a safer, little bit of a low variance, safer route than c-bet the flop, get called at a too high of a frequency, have to check the turn when we're over-bluffing the flop, or go crazy with barrel. So that there's 2 negative things that happen when you over-bluff the flop and they underfold. The first thing is that you end up barreling too much with too little equity and uncertainty as to how frequently they're folding on turns or rivers. That's a problem. You bet the flop, and you got some nonsense hand with no backdoor equity, that, you know, not a lot of backdoor equity, and then they call, and then you get yourself an innocuous turn card. It's just like, well, I could just double barrel them off some bullshit here. Then you bet the turn, and they call again, and you're like, all right, well, what do I do on the river? So there's just a lot of uncertainty there, and you could just run the risk of spewing into top pair plus way too often. So that's the first problem. And then the next problem. Wait, what are we doing here? Oh, this is King 5, Chris White. Okay, just making sure here. Lost my train of thought for a second there. What are these guys doing? Oh, okay. No big deal. No big deal. All right, we're just going to raise it up with the 10-8 of clubs. Full speed ahead. Full speed ahead. And we're going to play this King 6 of clubs on the button as well. I had 2 points that I wanted to make, and I've forgotten what the second point was. Damn it. It'll come back to me, guys. No worries. Guys and gals out there, ladies and gentlemen. 2 negative things about over-bluffing the flop. Yeah, the first thing... Right, okay, so yeah, that was the other thing. So the first thing, he's got more 7s here than we do, so we're just going to check back. And this is exactly the type of scenario against a short stack. I'm just going to take a delayed barrel, bluff line. I'm not really excited about this, but we do have a pair now. We're going to have to call. I think we'll just go ahead and bet this turn. Versus the check line. I think you can safely fold here. They could still be value betting flushes. They could have an 8 with a bigger kicker. They could definitely have the occasional 4, even though it's not necessarily always going to be a thing. And they have all their 7x combos, so it's pretty difficult for us to find bluffs there, other than, you know, some diamond combos, or maybe they're willy-nilly with just 2 Broadway cards and no diamonds. It's hard to say exactly what their bluffs are, but there's plenty of value combos, and they're going to have quite a bit of bluff action going on there, which may or may not ever be the case. All right, so we'll go ahead and check here. So that, yeah, the second is that when you over bluff on the flop, not only are you going to talk yourself into barreling too wildly on the turn or the river without a good amount of, you don't have a good amount of things going for you. Like, they have a wide range for sure, but you don't know what frequency they're going to fold what portion, and it can just be spewy and messy. The other thing is that if you bluff too much on the flop, that means you end up checking the turn too often because you don't have enough hands that barrel. So let's say, you're going to bet the flop and you hope that your c-bet works, and then if it doesn't, your turn, you're going to tighten up a bit and you're not going to be going all crazy because you don't want to be barreling like a nutcase and you have an uncertain amount of fold equity. Well, the next thing that happens is that you check back too much on the turn. So when you check back too much on the turn after betting too much on the flop and not getting enough folds, then that means you're going to get to the river with a really weak range and your opponent is going to have initiative. So the way that plays out is you raise, they call, you bet the flop, they call, you check the turn, They check, you check the turn after they check, and then you're faced with a river where they have initiative, you have a really wide and weak range, and it's just a fucking nightmare. So tighter c-bet action on the flop makes more sense. You get more information on the turn as you give them the chance to check or bet, and then you can either call and realize equity, or you can fold, whatever makes sense. You can do all kinds of different things. And if they check a second time, then you can double barrel almost, I wouldn't say 100% of the time, but you could double barrel at a very high frequency and have a very high success rate. Definitely exploitable, because they don't check twice very often with hands that are going to call a river bet. That happens sometimes for sure. It's not going to work 100% of the time, but you definitely end up with more information. You still take advantage of position. If they do bet, you get to realize equity a little bit easier because they don't have a chance to check raise you. So delaying the flop to the turn, no matter how the rest of the hand plays out, is a really good line, and it makes a lot of sense. And I don't think it gets utilized enough. I think people just raise and then they c-bet. But in these games, as we've seen, the games are so loose that we probably don't want to over c-bet in these games. If anything, you want to play tight in these games and then just push equity when you can and take advantage of spots where they're weak. We know if they check twice that we can take the hand down by betting the turn and then sometimes betting the river afterwards. It's going to work a lot. So that's something we want to exploit, which means we have less of a reason to go crazy with the flop c-bets if they're tending to call the flop way too much. This just puts you in this position where you just have to barrel like a monkey and hope that they fold at some point. Whereas when you check back, you play two streets, you get to call on the turn, they can't check raise you, and then you get to double barrel versus their check lines at a high frequency. I think that is definitely a very good line to take in loose passive games. Or just loose games in general, because not everybody's going to be passive. They're going to just be kind of whimsically all over the place. What do I feel like doing today? What's the weather like out there? And am I drinking some lemonade? We got two pair with our 10-5 offsuit combination, and we'll just go ahead and lead. This is a limp pot. There's no real reason to allow them to see their flush draws and gut shots. A lot of gut shots out here, 4-6, ace-3, ace-4, top pair, whatever else. Ace-3 does get there, but it's still not enough combinations to stop us from betting. They could have worse 10s. They could have ace-4. They could have 5-4. I mean, they could have 2-3. There's just tons of reasons to just keep betting here. We have ace-4 of the offsuit combination variety. And it looks like it's going to limp all the way around here. Let's go ahead and fold. Haven't found too many spots for us to 3-bet today. Haven't found too many spots to 3-bet. Last video series we made was talking about 3-betting, 4-betting, 5-betting, all that pre-flop insanity. But to be fair, you just don't get a ton of that in these games. Certainly can take some opportunities for sure. It's not like you can't ever have a 3-bet bluff. You should be 3-betting relatively aggressively. Not just because you're 3-betting for value and that you have to have some bluffs, but also because your opponents are just going to fold a good bit of the time. And if they don't, then you still have initiative. You can have position. A lot of good things happen for you. 3-betting is good. It also creates action for your better hands. I don't know if you guys play on here too frequently, but we picked up that Grim Reaper avatar limited edition for Halloween. That's what I'm talking about. Kind of expected to have a bunch of trick-or-treaters at my place, but didn't even have a single one. Kind of crazy. You guys are probably out there from all kinds of different countries where trick-or-treating doesn't even exist. All right, we got King 4 offsuit. Same thing over here. Just going to be a folding combination. You hear that word a lot. Combination, combination. Learn combinatorics, guys. I'm not lying to you. Combinatorics, it'll change your whole poker existence. It's how you relate everything equity-wise. Bam. How many combinations are there? If I add combos or I remove combos, that decreases, increases equity, changes everything. So to know everything about combinatorics is very important. If you have a specific suit in your hand, that is going to basically drive you towards doing one thing versus another. Let's say, in this day and age, everybody's using a mixed strategy with multiple bet sizings and spots in this solver world or whatever. And you have a combination that's the same as another combination from a hand strength perspective, but one has a suit and the other one has a different suit. Depending on the board texture, depending on what you're trying to accomplish, whether you're bluffing or whether you're value betting, could definitely influence your bet sizing. So, for instance, if you have the top pair with a nut flush blocker or with a flush draw blocker, then you're probably going to be more likely to use a bigger bet size if that draw missed, because you have that kicker which puts more of those draws in your range. Like that card with, let's say the board is like 10 high with 2 spades, and then you have the king of spades, something like that, and you have king 10. You know, the king of spades could be a pretty high frequency bluffing card in the deck on that board. If the flush draw misses and you have the king of spades, and let's say the turn was a 9 or something that put up more straight draws, so then, you know, the king of spades is pretty high frequency bluff card because you have an over card, you have straight draws, you have flush draws, and all that shit missed. So that is a card in your hand that if it wasn't a 10, it could be like the 7 of spades. It could be any kicker that you're playing in that spot as a missed flush draw. And in this exact in this exact spot, you just have a 10. So you have a hand that can value bet, and you might want to use a bigger frequency or a bigger sizing rather when you have that versus when you have, like say the king of hearts, for instance. You have the king of hearts, then your opponent can have more flush draws in that spot because you're not blocking any of their spades, and you have a hand that has less bluffing combinations. You're not blocking them from having the hands that would fold whatever else. So you would want to use a smaller sizing there. Or let's say you have the king of spades and you bet twice with the king 10 and the river is a spade. Now you have a value combo blocker. You have a blocker to their flushes, and you might want to use that specific hand to check the river and call, because you can still beat some 10x combos, you can beat some of their value bets, and you have a blocker to what their primary or mid to top range, you know, flush draw, whatever gets there, those types of hands. Now you're blocking those with the king of spades, so it would make some sense to have that in your check call range rather than your bet fold range, or, you know, just your betting range in general, and then deciding whatever you're doing. So yeah, I mean, the suit that you have definitely can influence what you want to do with that specific combo at that specific time. Even though it can be the same hand strength, one might go into your check call range, one might go into your check fold range, one might go into your bet call range, your bet fold range, and then your sizing might be different. So if you thought that your opponent was, you know, never going to bluff you and he was going to still pay off with tons of worse combinations, then when the flush got there and we have the king 10 with the king of spades, we might still bet the river and then just plan on folding to a raise because our opponent will only ever have flushes, but he'll call enough of the time with worse hands, you know, worse pairs or whatever, that we can make a valuable valuable bet in that spot. So then you might want to size your bet down, because if you have the king of spades and you make a big bet, they might be less likely to call unless they've, you know, got the flush. So if that's the case, then again, you can be bluffing for a bigger sizing when you're trying to get them to fold, and then you can be value betting for a smaller sizing because you're definitely it's scary for them. You know, they don't have a blocker to our value combos. They're going to call in that spot less frequently. So a smaller bet sizing makes sense. But yeah, the combination you have exactly down to the suit, what the nature of the board texture is, all of these things add up to influencing your decisions. And we're just going to go ahead and fold here with the pocket threes with all the dudes in the pot. We got pocket jacks over here in the small blind. What the hell is this all about? And we're going to go ahead and raise it up against B-Dog. We're in that same scenario we were talking about earlier, folks. We're slightly deep, just a little bit deep. And let's go ahead and check the 8-5 offsuit. And we're just going to check on this flop. Definitely going to be value betting the turn. Tiny little overbet. Just a teensy-weensy little overbet. We get ace-jack with a jack of clubs in both hands. See? B-Dog folded that time. What should that tell you? It sucks that we ran into aces, but I think that we did all right. I think it was all right. It sucks that we ran into aces, but I'm pretty okay with that. Snuffy raises it up over... I think we're just going to flat call with ace-jack. I'm not super excited about it. This is a spot where I like folding as well. I don't really like 3-betting all that much. We isolate everybody and their brother calls. We're just going to get the hell out of dodge. We're basically just be done with both of these hands. And we're just going to fold here. We're just going to check back and try to hit that heart on the turn. That's definitely one of the best cards for us. It doesn't improve our hand just because when we do make it, we're going to have the nuts, you know? We're going to either have the queen with the blocker to the nut flush. We can call a bet here. If they all check, then I'm definitely just going to check back again. If Steve check shoves, we're screwed. We're just going to try to check back, hit our hand, and then value bet the river. Otherwise, we're just going to give up and lose to a pair that's showing down. We could have isolated here too, but the table's been relatively loose. Yeah, we're just going to give up here in the multi-way pot. So he definitely would have called or shoved on the turn. Probably called. Yeah, not much else we can really do in that spot. Not in the four-way hand, anyway, with everybody and their brother in there. That's the problem. Man, he raises it up again. Ugh. These guys are kind of short, so I'm just going to fold. But there is definitely a case to be made for 3-betting there. And if you're on the button and stacks are somewhat deeper, you can also make a case for flat calling. But in the games where there's high rake, I would not suggest that, especially in 6-max. If you're playing in a full range game and you're likely to get like 5 or 6 people to the flop, then that's going to be a bit better for your implied odds. But here, I would just be 3-betting B-Dog for the most part. Who knows we're making a video? Dr. Run Good. Sup, Ming? Is there like there's a lot of people that watch these videos, I guess. That's crazy. I don't know. I had no idea. I don't even play in these games that much. It's funny. Well, I hope you guys enjoy them because they're fun to make. If I wasn't playing live all the time, you know, Global Poker is definitely one of the sites I'd be playing on. Ace-8 offsuit, folding combination. What is this guy's name? Ice Cream Emperor or some shit? Ice Cream Emperor. I don't know if I would want to be the emperor of something that would just melt. You know what I mean? I mean, unless you got like a slew of ice cream workers to make more when that shit melts. I mean, I guess. But then you're not really the ice cream emperor. You're just kind of like a, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. It's weird. Maybe it's fried ice cream because he's got the astronaut avatar. We're going to check 4-8 offsuit. Yeah, we're going to put this in the old check fold range. Can't do much with this. Got plenty of other hands that interact with this board to do other things. We do have a gut shot now, and we have 8 high, so we'll go ahead and bluff 2 streets. Versus check back range. Very important to attack those unprotected checking ranges. Not bad at all. 10-3 of diamonds. Probably just going to fold this, but if it gets to us, we'll probably limp it in, all suited and whatnot. Getting a pretty good price here, getting 7-1. Our hand is suited. We'd rather have something else, but hey, we're just playing the diamonds here, folks. We're not going to play a big pot if we flop a 10 or a 3 for the most part. Knock on wood. But 2 diamonds, pretty nice, pretty nice. And mostly check fold. And we'll just check here again. Not much we can really do. Get out of dodge here for sure. We're just going to check and give this up as well. All right, guys, we'll be back with part 3 in just a little bit here. Hope you guys have enjoyed. Wait, never mind. Hold up. We'll just go ahead and pot it up. Now, clearly, this would be better to pot it up on a board texture where there's a lot of draws out there. He doesn't really have that many deuces. He's probably just going to be folding most of the time unless he slow played a boat or some shit. Set on the flop, not super likely. We're going to go ahead and flat call here. He's isolating very wide. Again, we could put this in the 3-bet range, but then DRKJ could come over the top. And we'll just play this 9-10 hand, and then we'll wrap this one up. We're going to be playing for stacks here, folks. We got the straight flush draw. So we'll see how this plays out. I'm assuming B-Dog is going to continuation bet. We are just going to call in position, as we would with tons of combos. And when he checks, we're just going to go ahead and bet. And we have ace-queen. Yeah, I'm kind of assuming just he check folds a lot on that board when he does. All right, we'll play the ace-queen hand, and then we're out of here. And we'll see you guys in the next video. All right, cool. All right, guys, see you next time.